The veteran Galactic Empire had ruled the Orion arm of the galaxy for 12,000 years, and all that time they had never once failed to conquer a world they desired. Admiral Kethvorin stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the blue planet grow larger on the viewing screen before him. He was a tall creature with gray skin and 4 eyes that glowed with a soft amber light. And he had spent 200 years climbing through the ranks of the Imperial Navy. Behind him stretched a fleet of 600 warships, each one capable of reducing a continent to glass and ash. "What do we know about these creatures?" he asked his science officer. "They call themselves humans." "Admiral," the officer replied while checking his data screens, "they have existed as a technological species for only a few thousand years, and they have never left their home system in any meaningful way." The Admiral made a sound of contempt deep in his throat. "Another primitive race, thinking they own the stars," he said. "Transmit the standard greeting and demand their immediate surrender." The communications officer worked at his console, and soon a message was traveling across space toward the small blue world called Earth. The message was simple and direct as all Imperial communications, where it informed the humans that the veteran Galactic Empire now claimed their solar system as Imperial territory, and that they were required to surrender all weapons and submit to Imperial rule within one standard. Their failure to comply would result in the complete destruction of their civilization. Admiral Kethvorin had sent this same message to 43 worlds during his career, and the response was always the same. Sometimes there was panic and immediate surrender. Sometimes there was defiance, followed by a short and brutal war, but the ending was always identical, with another world added to the Empire's vast collection. He expected nothing different from these humans. The response came faster than he anticipated, and it was not what he expected at all. A woman's face appeared on the viewing screen, and she had dark hair and calm eyes, and she wore a simple uniform with no decoration. "I am Director Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Defense Consortium," she said in a voice that held no fear. "We have received your transmission, and we must decline your generous offer." The Admiral blinked all 4 of his eyes in surprise. "You decline," he repeated. "That is correct," Director Tanaka continued. "We have been monitoring galactic communications for approximately 200 years, and we know exactly what the veteran Empire does to the worlds it conquers." She paused, and her expression remained perfectly calm. "We know about the slave markets on Veth Prime," she said. "We know about the extinction of the Kilori people who refused to submit, and we know about the strip mining of 17 inhabited worlds." Admiral Kethvorin felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping up his spine. "You have been watching us," he said slowly. "We have been preparing." Director Tanaka corrected him. "Sol system is now closed to all veteran vessels, and you are hereby ordered to withdraw immediately." The Admiral stared at the screen for a long moment, and then he began to laugh. It was a deep rumbling sound that echoed across the bridge, and his officers joined in the laughter. "You order us to withdraw," he said. When he could speak again, "Little human, I have 600 warships behind me, and each one could crack your moon in half. I am aware of your fleet's capabilities," the director replied. "I am also aware that you have no idea what you are facing." "Then enlighten me," the Admiral said with amusement thick in his voice. "No," Director Tanaka said. "I think it will be more educational for you to discover it yourself, but I will give you one final warning." She leaned forward slightly, and her eyes seemed to look directly into the Admiral's soul. "Turn your fleet around now," she said. "Leave this system and never return, and we will allow you to live, but if you advance even one more unit toward our world, you will not survive to regret it." The transmission ended, and the screen went dark. Admiral Kethvoran stood in silence for several seconds. "Admiral," his tactical officer said carefully, "our long-range sensors detect no defensive stations, no warships, and no orbital weapons platforms of any kind around the inner planets." "As I expected," the Admiral said. "They are bluffing and hoping we will be frightened by strong words and nothing more." He turned to face his bridge crew with determination burning in his 4 eyes. "All ships advance," he commanded. "Standard conquest formation and prepare planetary bombardment sequences." The fleet began to move and 600 engines flared to life. As the warships accelerated toward the distant blue planet, Admiral Kethvoran watched the stars slide past on the viewing screen, and he thought about how he would describe this day in his memoirs: another easy conquest of another primitive world that thought it could stand against the might of the Empire. They passed the orbit of the outermost planet, a small frozen world the humans called Pluto. Without incident, they continued past the gas giants at the edge of the system, and still nothing happened. The Admiral began to feel his confidence growing with each passing hour. Then they reached the orbit of Neptune, and everything changed. The ship directly to the right of the Eternal Dominion, a heavy cruiser called the Flame of Victory, simply vanished. There was no explosion, and no debris, and no distress signal. One moment it was there, and the next moment it was gone, as if it had never existed. "What happened?" the Admiral demanded. "Unknown, sir," the tactical officer replied with fear creeping into his voice. "The Flame of Victory has completely disappeared from all sensors." Before anyone could respond, 2 more ships vanished in exactly the same way. Then 5 more. Then 10. Admiral Kethvoran, as his warships blinked out of existence one by one. "Full stop," he screamed. "All ships full stop." The fleet came to a halt, but the disappearances continued on the viewing screen. The Admiral could see strange distortions in space itself, ripples and tears in the fabric of reality that opened beneath his ships like hungry mouths and swallowed them whole. "Get me Director Tanaka," he ordered. The human woman's face appeared on the screen once more, and her expression had not changed at all. "You were warned," she said simply. "What are you doing to my ships?" the Admiral demanded. "We are defending our home." Director Tanaka replied, "You have now lost 80 vessels, and you will continue to lose more unless you retreat immediately." The Admiral looked at the chaos unfolding around his fleet, and he realized with growing terror that he had made a terrible mistake. He had walked into something he did not understand, and now his ships were dying, and he had no idea how to stop it. "What are you?" he whispered. Director Tanaka smiled, and it was not a warm expression. "We are humanity," she said, "and this is our home." Admiral Kethvoran had fought in 37 wars, across 4 centuries of service to the Vethran Empire, and he had never known fear like this. His fleet was dying around him, and he could not understand how or why. The Vethran way of war was simple and effective, and it had worked for 12,000 years. You gathered more ships than your enemy. You brought more weapons and more soldiers and more firepower. You crushed them with overwhelming force until nothing remained but ash and submission. But the humans had no ships at all. They had no orbital stations and no weapons platforms and no fleet of any kind. They had only their small blue planet hanging in the void, and somehow that was enough to destroy the greatest military force the Admiral had ever commanded. "Report," he demanded of his tactical officer. "We have lost 112 ships, Admiral," the officer replied with his voice shaking. "Our weapons are firing, but they strike nothing, and our shields are useless against whatever is attacking." U.S. Another ship vanished from the formation, and the Admiral watched it disappear into a ripple of distorted space. "Show me what is happening to our vessels," he commanded. The science officer worked frantically at his console, and soon the main viewing screen displayed a magnified image of a veteran destroyer as it was swallowed by the enemy weapon. The Admiral watched as the fabric of space itself seemed to bend and fold around the ship. It was like watching water spiral down a drain, except the water was reality itself, and the drain led somewhere that the Admiral did not want to imagine. It is some kind of gravitational manipulation, the science officer said with awe and terror mixing in his voice. They are creating localized space-time ruptures that pull our ships into compressed dimensional pockets. That is impossible, the Admiral said. No species has ever achieved that level of control over gravity. With respect, Admiral, the science officer replied. The evidence suggests otherwise. Director Tanaka's face appeared on the communication screen once more, and her calm expression had not changed in the slightest. You have now lost 120 vessels, she informed him. Your fleet will be completely destroyed within the next 2 hours unless you withdraw. You cannot do this, the Admiral snarled. The Empire will send 1,000 fleets to avenge us. The Empire is welcome to try, the director replied. But I suggest you focus on the immediate problem of your own survival. She paused, and something that might have been sympathy flickered across her face. Admiral, I understand that you are a soldier following orders, and I do not enjoy killing. But I will not hesitate to destroy every ship in your fleet if you force me to do so. How? The Admiral demanded. How have you done this, and why have we never heard of such weapons? Director Tanaka leaned back in her chair and folded her hands in front of her. 150 years ago, she began, human scientists discovered how to manipulate dark energy, and we realized that this knowledge could change everything. She gestured toward a screen that the Admiral could not see. We also realized that the galaxy was full of aggressive empires like yours who would try to take this technology by force, so you hid. The Admiral said. We prepared, the director corrected him. We built our defenses in secret, and we watched the galaxy, and we learned everything we could about potential threats. She smiled again, and this time it was almost warm. We knew you would come eventually, and we have been ready for you for a very long time. The Admiral felt his hands trembling as he gripped the arms of his command chair. What else can you do? He asked. You do not want to know, Director Tanaka replied. But I will tell you this much. She pointed at something on her console. Right now, I have gravitational lenses positioned around your fleet that can focus our sun's energy into beams capable of melting through any armor ever created. And there are quantum tunnels standing ready to redirect any missiles you fire directly back into the ships that launched them. And there are devices we call stillness fields that can stop all atomic motion in a targeted area and freeze your warships into brittle statues that will shatter at the slightest touch. The Admiral felt his heart pounding in his chest as the full scope of humanity's power became clear to him. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because I want you to understand that resistance is not just difficult, but genuinely impossible, the director replied. I want you to return to your empire and report exactly what you have seen here. You want us to spread fear. The Admiral realized, I want to prevent future wars, Director Tanaka said. If the Empire understands what they face here, perhaps they will choose not to send another fleet. Admiral Kethvoran looked at his tactical display and saw that he had lost 150 ships now. Nearly a quarter of his fleet was gone, and they had not even managed to fire a single effective shot in return. His communications officer suddenly straightened at his console. Admiral, the officer, sir, said. We are receiving a priority transmission from the Imperial Palace. The Admiral felt his blood run cold. Put it through, he commanded. The face of High Commander Velrith appeared on the screen, and his expression was thunderous with rage. Admiral Kethvoran, Velrith said, the Emperor has been monitoring your engagement, and he is most displeased. High Commander, the Admiral began. The situation here is unlike anything we have ever encountered. Silence. Volrath snapped. You command the largest fleet in this sector, and you are being defeated by a single world with no visible military forces. Their weapons are beyond anything in our records. The Admiral tried to explain. They can manipulate space-time itself, and our defenses are useless. Then find a way to overcome their defenses. Volrath commanded. The Emperor has decreed that this world must fall, and retreat is not an option. The transmission ended and Admiral Kethvoran sat in silence. He looked at the viewing screen where Earth hung like a blue jewel against the darkness of space. He looked at his tactical display where another 5 ships had just vanished, and he looked at Director Tanaka, who was watching him with something that might have been pity. I heard that transmission, she said quietly. Your Emperor has ordered you to continue the attack. Yes, the Admiral replied. And you know that if you do so, your entire fleet will be destroyed. Yes, the Admiral said again. Director Tanaka sighed, and for the first time she looked tired. Then I am sorry for what must happen next, she said. Truly I am. We have no choice, the Admiral told her. The Empire does not accept failure. Neither do we, the Director replied, and her voice had grown cold once more. You were given a chance to leave and you refused. Now you will face the full power of Earth's defenses. She leaned forward, and her eyes were hard as stone. Admiral Kethvoran, I want you to understand something very clearly before you die. We did not want this war, but we will end it. And when we have finished, the galaxy will know that Earth is not to be trifled with. The Admiral straightened in his chair and tried to find the courage that had carried him through 37 wars. Then let it begin, he said. Director Tanaka nodded once, and the screen went dark outside the Eternal Dominion. The humans began their counterattack in earnest. Director Yuki Tanaka stood in the command center of Earth's Defense Consortium and watched 600 red dots on her tactical display begin to move forward. The Vethran fleet had been ordered to attack, and they were obeying that order despite knowing it meant their deaths. She felt a deep sadness in her heart, but she did not let it show on her face. Admiral Kethvoran is advancing with all remaining ships, her tactical officer reported. They are attempting a concentrated push toward Mars. Their strategy, another officer asked, overwhelm our defenses with numbers. Director Tanaka replied, it is the only approach they know, and it will not work. She turned to face the massive screen that dominated the center wall of the command room. On it, she could see the entire solar system laid out in precise detail, with Earth at the center and the Vethran fleet approaching like a swarm of angry insects. How many ships have we destroyed so far? She asked. 172 vessels, the tactical officer replied. The space-time rupture generators are operating at 60% capacity. Director Tanaka nodded slowly. The Vethran Empire believed in overwhelming force because it had always worked for them. They could not comprehend a species that fought with physics itself rather than with ships and soldiers. They did not understand that humanity had spent a century preparing for this exact moment. Increase the rupture generators to full power, she commanded, and activate the solar lenses. Director, a young officer said hesitantly. At full power we will destroy their entire fleet within minutes. I know, Tanaka replied. She thought about the beings on those ships and the lives that were about to end, and the families that would never see their loved ones again. She thought about the 43 worlds that Admiral Kethvoran had conquered and the billions of lives that had been lost or enslaved under Vethran rule. She thought about what would happen to Earth if she showed mercy and allowed the Empire to believe that humanity could be defeated. Execute the Severance Protocol. She ordered. The room fell silent. Every officer present knew what those words meant. The Severance Protocol was humanity's final answer to any invasion force, and it had never been used before this day. It represented the full and terrible power that Earth had developed in secret over the past century. Director, her executive officer said quietly. Are you certain? Tanaka turned to look at him, and her eyes were filled with grief, but also with absolute determination. They were given every opportunity to retreat, she said. They chose to continue their attack. We cannot afford to show weakness, and we cannot afford to let a single ship escape to report that our defenses can be overcome. She looked back at the tactical display. The galaxy must understand that Earth is not to be challenged. Today, we teach them that lesson. She raised her hand and then brought it down in a sharp gesture. Execute the protocol now. The officers moved to their stations and began entering commands into their consoles. Outside in the darkness of space, the Vethran fleet continued its advance, unaware that death was seconds away. Admiral Kethvoran stood on his bridge and watched the stars through his viewing screen. He had lost nearly 200 ships, and still the humans had not deployed a single visible weapon. Their attacks came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Ships vanished into folds of twisted space. Others were struck by beams of concentrated stellar energy that burned through their hulls in seconds. Still others simply stopped moving, as their atoms were frozen in place by fields that defied all known physics. And yet the Admiral pressed forward because he had no other choice. The Empire did not accept failure, and retreat meant death as surely as the human weapons did. Admiral, his sensor officer called out with panic in his voice. We are detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system. Source, the Admiral demanded. Unknown, sir, but they are everywhere, and they are focused directly on our fleet. Kethvoran felt his heart stop for a single terrible moment. He understood what was about to happen, even if he could not explain how all ships. He shouted into his communicator. Emergency retreat and maximum speed. It was too late. The Severance Protocol activated, and 600 warships experienced simultaneous gravitational collapse. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Each ship was suddenly subjected to forces that compressed their hulls inward with irresistible pressure. Metal screamed and buckled. Reactors were crushed to critical density. Entire vessels folded in on themselves, like paper being crumpled by an invisible fist. Admiral Kethvoran had one final moment of awareness as his flagship began to collapse around him. He saw the viewing screen crack and shatter. He felt the deck beneath his feet begin to bend upward. He heard the screams of his crew as they were pulled toward the center of the compression field, and then there was nothing but darkness and silence. In less than 4 seconds, the entire Vethran fleet ceased to exist. 600 warships became 600 expanding clouds of debris drifting. In the void between Neptune and Uranus, there were no survivors. There were no escape pods. There were no distress signals. Just silence and wreckage in the cold light of distant stars. Director Tanaka watched the tactical display as 600 red dots vanished simultaneously. She had just killed over 3 million sentient beings, and she felt the weight of every single death pressing down on her soul. It is done, she said quietly. The command center was absolutely silent. No one moved and no one spoke. They all understood what had just happened and what it meant for humanity's future. Open a channel to all frequencies. Tanaka ordered. Every frequency that the Vethran Empire monitors. Channel open, director. Tanaka straightened her uniform and composed her face into an expression of cold authority. This message is addressed to the Vethran Galactic Empire and to all species who may be monitoring. She began. Approximately 4 minutes ago, a fleet of 600 Vethran warships entered Sol System with the intention of conquering Earth. That fleet has been completely destroyed. There are no survivors. She paused to let the words sink. And across the galaxy, Sol System is sovereign human territory, and it will remain so forever. Any vessel entering this system without explicit permission will be destroyed without warning. There will be no negotiation. There will be no exception. There will be no mercy. She leaned forward and her voice dropped to something that was almost a whisper. "We did not seek this confrontation, but we will not shy away from it. Earth is prepared for this day for over a century, and we are ready to defend ourselves against any threat. To the Vethran Empire, I say this. Send another fleet, and we will destroy it. Send 1,000 fleets, and we will destroy them all. You cannot threaten us, and you cannot intimidate us, and you cannot defeat. Usus, Sol system is closed. Forever." She straightened, and her expression softened just slightly. "To all other species watching this message, I offer a different word. Earth does not seek conquest or domination. We want only to live in peace within our own system. If you approach us with respect and honest intentions, we will welcome contact. But if you come with weapons and warships and dreams of conquest, then you will share the fate of the Vethran fleet. This is Director Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Defense Consortium. This message will not be repeated." She made a cutting gesture, and the transmission ended. Around her, the officers slowly returned to their duties, but the atmosphere in the room had changed forever. They had just announced themselves to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. They had destroyed an Imperial fleet in seconds and broadcast the footage to every corner of known space. Earth was no longer a quiet backwater planet that no one had heard of. Now it was the world that had humiliated the greatest empire in the Orion Arm, and somewhere in the vastness of space, the Vethran Emperor was watching that same broadcast, and he was already planning his revenge. 8 months passed after the destruction of Admiral Kefvarun's fleet, and in that time, the galaxy changed in ways that no one had predicted. The footage of 600 Vethran warships being crushed in seconds spread across every inhabited world. In the Orion Arm, species that had lived under the Empire's boot for centuries watched in stunned silence as the mighty Vethran Navy was annihilated by a single planet they had never heard of. Whispers of rebellion began in the slave markets of Veth. Prime talk of independence spread through the conquered worlds, like fire through dry grass, and on the throne world of the Vethran Empire, Sovereign Aldrich the Undying burned with a rage that made his advisors tremble. He was old beyond measure, having ruled for 3 centuries through a combination of medical technology and sheer force of will. He had crushed 100 rebellions and conquered 1,000 worlds, and no one had ever dared to challenge him so directly. But these humans had not just challenged him. They had humiliated him. They had destroyed his fleet without losing a single ship of their own. They had broadcast the footage to the entire galaxy as a deliberate insult, and now his empire was beginning to crack at the edges as subject species dared to dream of freedom. Assemble the Grand Fleet, he commanded his High Council. The council members exchanged nervous glances. Sovereign High Commander Velrith said carefully, "The humans have demonstrated weapons capabilities far beyond anything in our arsenal. Then we will bring weapons they have never seen." The Emperor replied, "We will gather every ship in the Empire, and we will descend upon their world like the wrath of the gods themselves. How many ships do you propose?" Velrith asked. The Emperor's eyes burned with cold fire. "All of them." And so the greatest military mobilization in galactic history began. Ships were pulled from every sector of the Empire. Fleets that had spent centuries guarding distant borders were recalled to the throne world. Warships that had been in dry dock for repairs were rushed back into service. Weapons platforms were stripped from conquered worlds and loaded onto transport vessels. When the gathering was complete, the Vethran Grand Fleet numbered 12,000 warships. It was a force capable of conquering entire galaxies. It was a force that had never been assembled before in the Empire's long history. And it was all aimed at one small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Sovereign Aldrich stood on the command deck of his WAS personal flagship, the Eternal Throne, and watched his armada stretch across space in every direction. "Transmit our approach to the humans," he commanded. "I want them to see what is coming for them." The message was sent, and it reached Earth 3 days before the fleet itself. Director Yuki Tanaka watched the transmission with her command staff gathered around her. The Emperor's face filled the screen, and his voice echoed through the room. "Humans of Earth," Aldrich said, "you have committed crimes against the Vethran Empire that cannot be forgiven. You have destroyed our ships and killed our soldiers and insulted our honor before the entire galaxy. For this you will pay the ultimate price. I am coming with 12,000 warships and weapons capable of cracking your world in half. When I am finished, there will be nothing left of your species but ash and memory. And then I will erase even that. No record of humanity will remain. Anywhere in the universe, it will be as if you never existed." The transmission ended and silence filled the command center. 12,000 ships. One of the officers whispered Director Tanaka studied the tactical projections that her analysts had prepared. "He has stripped his entire empire to build this fleet," she observed. "His borders are undefended, and his conquered worlds are guarded by skeleton crews. He is gambling everything on this attack." Her executive officer agreed. "If he fails here, his empire may not survive the aftermath. Then we must ensure that he fails," Tanaka said, "completely and utterly, and in a way that the galaxy will never forget." She turned to her communications. "Officer, send a response to the Sovereign." "What should it say, Director?" Tanaka smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Tell him that Earth has received his message. Tell him that Sol System remains closed to all Vethran vessels. Tell him that our terms have not changed. And tell him that we are looking forward to his arrival." 3 days later, the Vethran Grand Fleet arrived at the edge of Sol System. Sovereign Aldrich stood on his command deck and watched the distant blue dot that was Earth around him stretched 12,000 warships, more firepower than any single military force had ever wielded in the history of the galaxy. "Transmit the final ultimatum," he commanded. Director Tanaka's face appeared on his viewing screen. "Sovereign Aldrich," she said, "you have been warned twice already that Sol System is closed. This is your final opportunity to withdraw." The Emperor laughed, and it was a cold, cruel sound. "Withdraw," he repeated. "Little human, I have brought 12,000 ships to your doorstep. Your tricks may have worked against a single fleet, but they cannot stop an armada of this magnitude. We will overwhelm your defenses through sheer numbers, and then we will burn your world to cinders." Director Tanaka's expression did not change. "We anticipated that you would think that way," she said, "which is why we have prepared something special for this occasion." She pressed a button on her console. "Look toward Jupiter, Sovereign." The Emperor turned his attention to the tactical display, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The space around the gas giant was rippling and distorting as massive structures began to emerge from what appeared to be folds in reality itself. They were vast beyond comprehension. Weapons platforms the size of small moons, automated hunter-killer drones numbered in the millions, defense stations bristling with weapons that the Emperor's scientists could not identify. And at the center of it all was something that made even the hardened Sovereign take an involuntary step backward. It was a device of some kind, a massive spherical construct surrounded by rings of glowing energy. The Emperor's science officers were frantically analyzing it, and their readings made no sense. "What is that?" Aldrich demanded. Director Tanaka smiled again. "We call it the Stellar Forge," she said. "It can convert the mass of a gas giant directly into energy and direct that energy anywhere we choose. Right now, it is pointed at your fleet. If I give the order, it will release more power than your entire armada could generate. In 1,000 years, your ships would not even have time to scream before they cease to exist." The Emperor stared at the device, and for the first time in 3 centuries, he felt genuine fear. "You are bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I do not bluff," Director Tanaka replied, "and I do not make empty threats. You brought 12,000 ships. Sovereign, we prepared for 1,000,000. She leaned forward and her eyes were hard as diamond. "Turn your fleet around. Leave this system and never return. This is your last chance." Sovereign Aldrich looked at the massive weapons platforms emerging from dimensional pockets. He looked at the stellar forge humming with barely contained power. He looked at the millions of hunter-killer drones that were already moving into attack formation. And he realized with terrible clarity that he had made a catastrophic mistake. He had gambled his entire empire on this attack, and he had lost. Before a single shot was fired, "All ships," he said in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, "reverse course. We are returning to Vethran space." For the first time in 12,000 years, the Vethran Empire retreated from a conquest, and the galaxy watched in astonishment as the greatest military force ever assembled turned and fled from a single planet. Director Tanaka watched them go, as she felt no joy in her victory, only the heavy weight of responsibility for what would come next. The retreat of Sovereign Aldrich's grand fleet sent shockwaves through the galaxy that would be felt for generations on Veth Prime. The Emperor returned to a throne world in chaos. The news of his retreat had arrived before his ships and his subjects were already whispering words that had not been spoken in 12,000 years. Words like weakness and failure and the end of empire. In the conquered territories, rebellion erupted like wildfire. Species that had been enslaved for centuries suddenly found the courage to resist when they learned that the mighty Vethran fleet had been turned back by a single planet. Kalori remnants emerged from hiding on a dozen worlds. The Bayoe remnants emerged. The Verbi remnants emerged from hiding on a dozen worlds. The Vairi remnants and worlds. The Marshkai threw off their chains on the mining colonies. The Volthrani began stockpiling weapons in secret, and everywhere throughout the empire, the subject races watched footage of the Vethran retreat and dared to hope. Director Yuki Tanaka watched these developments from Earth's command center, and she understood that humanity's actions had changed the galactic balance of power forever. The empire is fracturing. Her intelligence officer reported, "Our analysts estimate that Sovereign Aldrich has lost effective control of approximately 30% of his territory." "And the remaining 70%? Tanaka asked. "Holding for now, but unstable," the officer replied. "The Emperor is executing anyone suspected of disloyalty, but that is only making the situation worse." Tanaka nodded slowly. She had expected this outcome, but expecting something and seeing it unfold were very different experiences. "What about threats to Earth?" she asked. "None immediate," the tactical officer reported. "The Empire is too focused on internal problems to mount another attack, but they will recover eventually," Tanaka said. "Yes, Director. Then we need to ensure they never regain the strength to threaten us again." She stood and walked to the center of the command room, where a holographic map of the galaxy floated in the air. "We have demonstrated our defensive capabilities," she said. "Now we must demonstrate something else, Director." Our executive officer asked. Tanaka pointed at a star system on the map, an uninhabited region far from any civilization. "We are going to collapse that star," she said, "not to harm anyone, but to show the galaxy what we are capable of." The room fell silent. "Director," someone said, "that seems excessive." "It is necessary," Tanaka replied. "The Empire retreated because they were afraid of our weapons, but fear fades with time. We need to give them a reminder that will last forever, a demonstration that will be recorded and studied and passed down through generations, so that no one ever forgets what Earth can do." 1 week later, a small human probe arrived in the target system. It contained a miniaturized version of the Stella Forge technology, enough to trigger a cascading reaction in the star's core. The probe activated, and the star began to die. It took 3 hours for the collapse to complete, and the result was visible across half the galaxy. A star that had burned for 5 billion years simply ceased to exist, compressed into a black hole that swallowed its own light. The message was clear: Earth could destroy stars, and what could destroy stars could destroy anything. Director Tanaka broadcast a simple message alongside footage of the collapsing star. This demonstration was conducted in an uninhabited system. She said, "No lives were lost and no civilizations were harmed. But let this serve as a reminder to all species in the galaxy. Earth does not seek war. We do not desire conquest. We want only to live in peace within our own system. But we will defend ourselves against any threat with every weapon at our disposal. And as you have seen, our weapons are beyond anything you can imagine." The message spread across the galaxy, and it had the intended effect. Species that had been considering an alliance with the Vethran Empire quietly abandoned those planned. Civilizations that had been neutral in galactic affairs began reaching out to Earth with offers of friendship, and the Vethran Empire itself descended further into chaos as more and more of its subjects chose rebellion over continued servitude. Years passed, and the galaxy continued to change. The Vethran Empire eventually fractured into a dozen smaller states, none of which had the power to threaten Earth. New powers rose to fill the vacuum, and they all remembered the lesson of the blue planet. Earth remained isolated by choice. Its system closed to all but invited guests, but humanity did not remain passive. They began making contact with species that had suffered under Vethran rule, not to form alliances or build an empire of their own, but to share knowledge. Director Tanaka, now elderly but still sharp of mind, oversaw the creation of what came to be known as the Liberation Archives. It was a database containing the fundamental principles of humanity's gravitational technology, not the weapons themselves, which remained closely guarded secrets, but the basic science that any sufficiently advanced civilization could use to develop their own defenses. The archives came with a single condition: any species that received this knowledge must pledge to never threaten Earth, never approach Sol system without permission, and never forget what happened to those who tried. Centuries passed, and then millennia. Species evolved, and when extinct empires rose and fell, stars themselves changed as some burned out and others were born. But throughout all this time, one constant remained: Sol system was forbidden. The humans did not negotiate. The humans did not forgive, and the humans were always watching. Travelers approaching that region of space would find warning beacons at the edge of the system. The beacons broadcast a simple message in every known language: you are approaching Sol system, sovereign territory of humanity. Entry without permission is forbidden. Violators will be destroyed without warning. There will be no exceptions. There will be no mercy. Young pilots would hear stories from their elders about the long-ago war, about the fleet that vanished in seconds, about the star that was collapsed as a demonstration, about the blue planet that defeated an empire without ever leaving its orbit. Some thought the stories were exaggerated. Some thought the humans had died out long ago and the defenses were merely automated remnants. A few foolish souls occasionally tried to test the boundaries. None of them ever returned, because the humans were still there, still watching, still waiting, and still ready to defend their home against any threat. Director Yuki Tanaka had died thousands of years ago, but her legacy lived on. She had transformed humanity from a frightened species hiding in their solar system into the most feared civilization in the galaxy, not through conquest or cruelty, but through strength so overwhelming that no one dared to challenge it in the great libraries of 100 worlds. Her name was recorded with respect and fear. She was the woman who had said no to the most powerful empire in the Orion Armand, the woman who had made that no means something on Earth. Life continued much as it always had. Humans were born and lived and died and loved and dreamed. They looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there, and somewhere beyond the orbit of Neptune. The ancient weapons platforms still hummed with power, ready to defend, ready to destroy, ready to remind the galaxy once more, if necessary, that Earth was not to be trifled with, and never would be as long as humanity endured. The stars would remember. that one small blue planet had defied the galaxy.